It was 3:47 a.m. The radio came alive with a sound that didn't belong to that hour. A broken, gasping voice pushing through static. MEDEVAC needed. Grid coordinates. 2 wounded. Hostile fire. Urgent. Captain Sarah Mitchell froze. She had been on shift for 3 hours, her eyes half locked on the horizon over Bagram Airfield, the desert still breathing under moonlight. She'd heard hundreds of distress calls before, but this one stopped her breath mid-chest. The voice wasn't speaking English. It wasn't Pashto either. It was something else. A language she understood without ever learning it. Every word pressed into her mind, like it had always been there, waiting to be remembered. She quickly checked the coordinates. Her heart sank. That patch of desert hadn't seen combat in 6 years. No units, no patrols, nothing living out there. Or at least, nothing supposed to be. Her co-pilot turned his head, brows furrowed. "Sarah, you okay? You hear something?" She looked at him, and that's when she realized he hadn't heard anything. The radio on his side was dead silent, but in her headset, the voice was screaming. "Welcome to Secret Human Stories. Before we go deeper into this haunting night of duty, loss, and voices that shouldn't exist, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. Because tonight, we're flying into a mystery that defies everything we thought we knew. Sarah Mitchell didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in numbers, in hydraulics, rotor speeds, fuel gauges, and the weight of bodies inside a rescue chopper. She believed in medicine, in physics, in reality, and in the cold, metallic truth of a radio transmission cutting through the dark. But voices no one else could hear? That belonged in horror stories, not in her cockpit. At least, until that night. She was stationed at Bagram, 455th Expeditionary Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron, call sign Angel 7. She'd flown 114 MEDEVAC missions, saved 340 lives, lost 19. She knew the cost of hesitation, and she knew the sound of a soldier dying over the radio. But what she heard that night wasn't death. It was something far older and far colder. When the voice came again at 6:20 hours, just before sunrise, she was alone in the hangar doing pre-flight checks. The helicopter was powered down. The radios were off. But she heard it anyway, clear as daylight, like someone standing next to her whispering directly into her ear. MEDEVAC. 2 wounded. Same coordinates. She spun around. No one. Just the empty hangar and the distant hum of generators. Her heart pounded. She pulled out her tablet and entered the coordinates the voice had given. It marked a location 40 clicks northeast, deep in Helmand Province. A valley the military had abandoned in 2011 after a series of ambushes made it too costly to hold. No active patrols, no forward operating bases, nothing but dust and graves. That morning, she filed a report with her commanding officer, Major Dennis Harlan. He listened, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You're saying you heard a distress call on a powered-down radio from a grid that's been cold for 6 years, in a language you don't speak, but somehow understood." Sarah nodded. "I know how it sounds, sir." Harlan leaned back in his chair. "You've been flying non-stop for 3 months, Captain. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? She didn't answer. He stood up. "I'm grounding you for 72 hours. Rest. Hydrate. See the flight surgeon if this continues. That's an order." She saluted and left, but she knew rest wouldn't stop the voices, because that night, at exactly 03:47 again, she heard it once more. This time, she recorded it. She set her phone on the nightstand and waited. When the voice came through, she hit record. Her hands shook. The voice was clearer now. It gave the same coordinates, the same desperate tone. But this time, it added something new. 3 days. "Hurry." 3 days. When the voice stopped, she played back the recording. Silence. Just the hum of the air conditioning and her own breathing. Nothing else. The voice existed only in her head, only in her ears, and only for her. She sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the phone, and made a decision no pilot should ever make. She was going to that valley, with or without orders. Sarah wasn't reckless. She'd spent years mastering survival instincts in one of the most dangerous jobs in the military. But something about the voice felt wrong in a way that transcended logic. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't stress. It was real. And if it was real, then someone was out there. Someone was dying. Someone had been dying for 6 years. She spent the next day gathering intel. She accessed archived mission logs from 2011, cross-referencing every operation in that valley. What she found made her blood run cold. In March 2011, a MEDEVAC helicopter designated Rescue 4 had gone down in that exact grid. Mechanical failure. 2 crew members. Both declared killed in action. Their bodies were never recovered. The wreckage was never found. The area was deemed too hostile for retrieval operations. The file was sealed. She dug deeper. Found the names. Lieutenant Ryan Booker, pilot. Staff Sergeant Emily Cross, flight medic. 28 and 25 years old. Booker had a wife and a newborn daughter. Cross had just re-enlisted. They'd been responding to a distress call when their helicopter lost power and went down in a sandstorm. The last transmission was garbled. No survivors expected. Case closed. But Sarah had heard them. She was sure of it. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. But she knew that if she didn't go to those coordinates, the voices would never stop. And something worse would happen. On the third night, exactly 72 hours after the first transmission, Sarah made her move. She waited until 0200 hours, when the base was at its quietest. She forged a flight authorization, logged a fake maintenance test flight, and powered up Angel 7. Her co-pilot that night was Lieutenant Marcus Chen, a quiet kid from Oregon, who trusted her without question. She told him they were doing a system check along the southern perimeter. He didn't ask why they were flying northeast instead. He didn't ask why she was wearing full combat medical gear. He just followed her lead, the way good co-pilots do. They flew in darkness, low and fast, cutting through the cold desert air. The coordinates appeared on her HUD, a red blinking dot in the middle of nowhere. As they approached, the voice came back. But this time, it wasn't desperate. It was relieved. You came. Finally, you came. Sarah's hands tightened on the controls. Chen glanced at her. You good, Captain? She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Yeah. Just stay sharp. They descended into the valley. The terrain was brutal, jagged rocks and steep drops. No place to land safely. But there, half buried in sand at the base of a cliff, was the wreckage. Twisted metal. Faded Air Force markings. Rescue 4. Chen's voice cracked over the intercom. Holy hell. That's a downed bird. Sarah didn't respond. She was already setting them down, rotors kicking up a storm of dust. The moment they touched ground, she was out, med kit in hand, moving toward the wreckage. Chen followed, weapon raised, scanning for threats. The helicopter had been there for 6 years. The cockpit was crushed, the tail section sheared off. But inside, still strapped into their seats, were 2 bodies. Mummified by the dry heat, preserved by the isolation. Lieutenant Ryan Booker, Staff Sergeant Emily Cross. And clutched in Cross's hand was a radio, its battery long dead, its casing cracked but intact. Sarah knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Chen stood behind her, silent, reverent. Then he saw something that made him step back. Captain. Look. On the side of the wreckage, scratched into the metal with something sharp, were tally marks, 173 of them. Days. They'd survived the crash. They'd been alive, waiting, calling for help, for almost 6 months, until they weren't. Sarah's stomach turned. The voice hadn't been a ghost. It had been an echo, a psychic scar left in the fabric of the desert, a final, desperate transmission that had never stopped broadcasting, trapped in a loop, waiting for someone who could finally hear it. She reached for the radio in Cross's hand and gently pried it free. The moment she touched it, the voice came one last time. Soft. Calm. Thank you. Then, silence. Permanent silence. The kind that comes when a mission is finally complete. Chen helped her carry the bodies to Angel 7. They wrapped them in blankets, secured them in the cabin, and lifted off just as the sun began to rise. Flight back was silent. No chatter, no radio calls, just the rhythmic thump of the rotors and the weight of 2 souls finally going home. When they landed at Bagram, Major Harlan was waiting on the tarmac. His face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "Captain Mitchell, you are in direct violation of about 15 different protocols." She stepped out of the helicopter, exhausted, covered in dust, and met his eyes. "Sir, we found Rescue 4. Harlan's expression changed. He looked past her into the cabin, saw the bodies, and his anger dissolved. He didn't say another word. He just saluted. And Sarah, for the first time in 72 hours, let herself breathe. But the story didn't end there. Because as the military began the process of officially recovering and identifying the remains, something else emerged. When forensic teams examined the bodies, they found something unusual. Both Booker and Cross had sustained injuries consistent with blunt force trauma, not mechanical failure. Their helicopter hadn't malfunctioned. It had been shot down. And the evidence pointed to friendly fire. A classified drone strike, logged and buried in 2011, had mistakenly targeted Rescue 4 during a chaotic engagement. The military had known. They'd covered it up, declared it mechanical failure, sealed the file, and left 2 of their own in the desert to be forgotten. Sarah was called into a closed-door meeting with military intelligence. A man in a suit, no name given, sat across from her. "Captain, you've done a remarkable thing. But this situation is delicate. The families have been told one story. Changing that story now would cause unnecessary pain. We'd like your cooperation in maintaining the official narrative." Sarah stared at him. "You want me to lie?" He didn't blink. "We want you to honor the memory of 2 heroes without complicating their legacy." She stood up. "Their legacy is that they died calling for help, and no one came. That's not complicated. That's criminal." She walked out. 2 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell resigned her commission. She didn't go public. She didn't write a book. She just walked away. But before she left, she did one thing. She visited the families. Ryan Booker's widow, Amanda, lived in Ohio with her daughter, who was now 7 years old. Sarah sat in their living room and told her everything. The valley, the wreckage, the tally marks, the truth. Amanda cried. Not from grief, but from relief. Because for 6 years, she'd felt like something was unfinished, like Ryan was still out there. And now, finally, he wasn't. Sarah did the same with Emily Cross's parents. They listened in silence, then thanked her. Not for bringing Emily home, but for refusing to let her be forgotten. The voices never came back. The radio silence was complete. But Sarah still thought about them, about the weight of a call that no one answers, about the soldiers who fall through the cracks of bureaucracy and classified files, about the ones who die twice, once in the field and once in the records. She moved to Montana, became a civilian flight medic, and never spoke publicly about what she'd heard in that desert. But every year, on the anniversary of the recovery, She drove out to the middle of nowhere, stood under the stars, and listened. Just in case. Because she'd learned something in those 72 hours that most people never understand. The dead don't always rest. Not when they've been abandoned. Not when their last words went unanswered. And sometimes, if you're listening closely enough, in the right frequency, at the right moment, you'll hear them. Not as ghosts, but as a reminder that every call matters, that every voice deserves to be heard, and that some missions don't end just because the paperwork says they do. Years later, a journalist digging through declassified files stumbled onto the story. They reached out to Sarah for an interview. She declined. But she did send them a single photograph. It showed 2 names carved into a wooden memorial plaque she'd built herself. Lieutenant Ryan Booker, Staff Sergeant Emily Cross. Underneath, a simple inscription. They called. Someone finally answered. The article ran in a small military publication. Most people skipped over it. But for the families, for the veterans who knew what it meant to be forgotten, it was everything. And somewhere, in a valley 40 clicks northeast of Bagram, the wind still blows across the sand. The wreckage is gone now, removed and destroyed per military protocol. But if you stand there at 0347 hours, just before dawn, some say you can still feel it. Not a voice, not a ghost, just a presence. A reminder that the desert remembers what we choose to forget, and that some frequencies never truly go silent. They just wait for someone brave enough to listen. Sarah Mitchell never flew a military helicopter again, but she never stopped being a pilot, and she never stopped answering the call. Because that's what medics do. That's what rescuers do. They go into the dark. They listen for the voices no one else hears. And they bring people home, even when it takes 6 years, even when the world has moved on, even when the radio should be silent. Because some missions aren't about orders, or medals, or recognition. They're about making sure that when someone calls for help, someone, somewhere, is still listening. So now I ask you, have you ever felt something you couldn't explain? Heard a voice that wasn't there? Known something without knowing how? Share your story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Because here at Secret Human Stories, we believe that the most powerful truths aren't always the ones that make sense. They're the ones we can't ignore. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Help us honor the voices that refuse to be silenced. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, if you ever hear something in the silence, don't ignore it. Listen closely. Someone might be calling for you.